The rain fell like a relentless barrage against the asphalt, each drop shattering into 1,000 fragments that eerily mirrored the chaotic storm raging within my chest. It was 11:47 p.m., and Boston's deserted streets gleamed black under the melancholic amber glow of the streetlights. The heavy scent of wet concrete mingled with exhaust fumes as I hurried through the hospital staff exit, my sneakers squeaking a desperate rhythm against the slick pavement. 12 hours. That's how long I'd been on my feet in the pediatric ward, tending to tiny patients who, in my heart, deserved so much more tenderness and kindness than the cruel hand life had dealt them. My scrubs, now a second skin, clung to my exhausted body. The pale blue fabric was darkened with sweat, and here and there, a small, sticky splash of juice marked the triumph of a toddler who had finally managed a smile after 3 days of fever. These precious moments, the fleeting joys of a child's recovery, made everything worthwhile. Almost everything. My keys, a cold and metallic comfort, jingled faintly in my trembling fingers as I approached my beat-up Honda Civic, parked under the anemic, flickering fluorescent light of the staff garage. The metal was cold and wet beneath my palm when I reached for the handle, but then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, their echoes bouncing ominously off the concrete walls, each reverberation sending a fresh wave of dread through me. My blood turned to ice water, chilling me to the bone. Isabella, his voice sliced through the drumming rain like a sharpened blade, low and gravelly, a testament to too much whiskey and far too many cigarettes. I didn't need to turn around. My entire being recognized the sound, confirming the man standing behind me. Derek Morrison. My ex-boyfriend. My recurring nightmare. The man I had spent the last 6 agonizing months trying, with every fiber of my being, to forget. I turned slowly, my back instinctively pressing flat against the cold metal of my car door. He emerged from the deep shadows cast between 2 parked vehicles, his police uniform noticeably wrinkled and stained, the metal of his badge catching a brief, menacing glint from the overhead light. At 29, Derek possessed the kind of rugged features that had once made my heart race with a thrilling, dangerous excitement. Now, they simply made my skin crawl with an instinctive revulsion. His dirty blonde hair hung in damp strands across his forehead, and his brown eyes held that familiar, chilling glint of anger, laced with something darker, something profoundly hungry. "You've been avoiding my calls." His words slurred ever so slightly, and the acrid smell of stale alcohol reached me even from 6 feet away, a potent, disgusting cloud. "We broke up, Derek. 6 months ago, remember?" I clutched my keys tighter, the sharp metal edges digging painfully into my palm. "You don't get to call anymore." He took another step closer, and I caught sight of the fresh scratches marring his knuckles. A chilling realization dawned on me: someone had fought back recently. And that someone, I instinctively knew, had probably not been as lucky as I was, standing here, right now. "See, that's where you're wrong, baby." The pet name, once a term of endearment, now dripped with raw possession and a thinly veiled threat. "We're not done. We'll never be done." The rain plastered his hair to his skull as he advanced, steadily backing me further against the car. I could see the moisture collecting on his uniform, a dark stain spreading, and hear the sickening squish of his boots on the wet concrete. My heart hammered against my ribs so violently, I was certain he could hear its frantic rhythm. "I know you've been working extra shifts," he continued, his voice dropping to an intimate, predatory whisper that made my skin prickle with revulsion. "Trying to pay for that old woman's medical bills. Your mama, right? Sweet Sophia in the memory care unit." My mother's name, uttered so casually from his lips, felt like a deep violation. "Stay away from her." "Or what?" He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound devoid of any warmth whatsoever. "You'll call the cops?" "I am the cops, sweetheart." The overhead light flickered again, bathing his face in alternating moments of harsh, revealing illumination and deep, unsettling shadow. In one of those brief, disorienting moments of darkness, he moved even closer. Close enough that I could distinctly smell the potent whiskey on his breath, and see the fine, red veins threading through his bloodshot eyes. I've been patient, Bella. Real patient. But my patience is running thin. I pressed harder against the car, the door handle digging painfully into my spine. Derek, you're drunk. Go home. Sleep it off. Home. He barked out another laugh, a desperate, hollow sound that echoed off the concrete walls. You think I have a home? You think any of us have homes anymore? Something in his voice shifted then, a subtle but profound change. It became desperate, frantic, raw with an unfamiliar edge. This wasn't just about us anymore, I realized with a fresh wave of terror. Something else entirely was driving him, something that made him even more dangerous than before. I owe people money, Bella. Bad people. The kind who don't care about badges or uniforms or anything except getting what they're owed. His hand reached out, its calloused fingers grazing my cheek, an invasive, horrifying touch. But you could fix all that. I jerked violently away from his touch, a surge of pure adrenaline flooding my system. I don't have any money. You know that. You don't need money. His smile was a terrifying display of teeth and predatory hunger. You just need to come with me tonight. That's when I ran. I pushed past him with every ounce of strength I possessed, my shoulder slamming hard into his chest. He stumbled backward, clearly caught off guard by my sudden, desperate movement, granting me precious seconds to bolt toward the garage exit. My feet pounded against the wet pavement, a frantic drumbeat of escape, as I heard him curse loudly behind me, his heavier footsteps echoing the relentless pursuit. The rain hit me like a solid wall of ice as I burst from the parking garage onto the street. My thin scrubs offered no protection against the biting October chill, and within seconds, I was utterly soaked through, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. But I didn't stop running. Couldn't stop. I knew Derek understood the depth of his desperation, and I knew that if he caught me tonight, I might not live to see tomorrow. The old part of Boston stretched ahead of me, a labyrinth of narrow, winding streets and shadowy alleyways. Historic buildings loomed on either side, their ancient brick facades gleaming wetly under the distant, hazy streetlight. My lungs burned with every gasp as I sprinted down Washington Street, past closed shops and empty, echoing sidewalks. The sound of Derek's pursuit had faded, but I didn't trust the silence. I didn't trust anything anymore. I ducked instinctively into a narrow alley between two crumbling buildings, pressing my back against the cold, rough brick wall, desperately trying to catch my breath. Rain streamed down my face, mingling with tears I didn't even remember shedding, blurring my vision. My red hair hung in heavy, wet tangles around my shoulders, and I could taste the metallic tang of copper in my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue hard during my frantic escape. That's when I heard new voices. Male, rough, and getting terrifyingly closer. She went this way. Check the alley. Boss ain't going to be happy if we don't find her. My blood turned to slush. These weren't Derek's voices. These were new threats, unknown dangers materializing in a night that had already spiraled from bad to utterly catastrophic. I crept deeper into the oppressive shadows, my sneakers now mercifully silent on the wet pavement. Through the sheeting rain, I caught sight of movement at the mouth of the alley. Two men in dark clothing, their faces obscured by the shadows. One pointed in my direction, and I knew, with a sickening lurch, that I had mere seconds before they spotted me. I bolted back onto the main street, scrambling past a closed bookstore and a shuttered cafe, my feet slipping precariously on the slick sidewalk. The sound of pursuit echoed behind me, but I didn't dare look back, didn't dare break my stride. Ahead, a warm, inviting light spilled from the elegant windows of an upscale Italian restaurant. Its sophisticated facade, a beacon in the storm, presented a stark, almost absurd contrast to the utter chaos raging in my chest. And that's when I saw him. tall, undeniably imposing, a figure in an expensive charcoal suit emerging effortlessly from the restaurant's ornate entrance. His dark hair was perfectly styled, somehow untouched by the relentless rain. He moved with a kind of innate confidence that suggested he'd never once had to run from anything in his life. I couldn't think. Pure, primal desperation made the choice for me. I lunged and grabbed his hand. His skin was surprisingly warm against my freezing fingers, and I felt him tense, a subtle ripple of surprise at the unexpected, almost violent contact. Up close, he was even more intimidating than I'd first thought, at least 6 feet 3 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to completely block out the streetlight behind him. His eyes were the color of winter storms, a pale blue-gray, and sharp enough, I felt, to cut glass. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the relentless drumming of the rain. "Help me." For a single, agonizing heartbeat, he said nothing. He simply studied my face with those penetrating eyes, taking in my soaked scrubs, my utterly terrified expression, the desperate way I clung to his hand as if it were my last lifeline. Then Derek's voice, laced with fury, cut through the night. "Bella, get back here." The stranger's gaze flicked past me, briefly acknowledging where Derek stood, rain-soaked and absolutely livid, at the end of the block. Then his attention returned to me, and something profound shifted in his expression. Something dangerous and fiercely protective, all at once. "Who hurt you?" His voice was low, controlled, almost unnervingly calm, with the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't quite place. Before I could even attempt an answer, 2 more men in dark suits materialized from the shadows behind him. They moved like ghosts, silent and deadly, seamlessly flanking us without a sound. Derek took one look at them, his fury momentarily replaced by a stark, sobering fear, and stopped dead in his tracks. The stranger squeezed my hand once, gently, and I felt something intangible pass between us. A promise, perhaps, or a warning, or both. "You're safe now," he said simply, and for the first time in what felt like months, I almost believed it. The silence stretched between us, taut and vibrating like a pulled wire, as Derek, defeated, retreated back into the rain-soaked darkness. My hand remained locked in the stranger's firm grip, his unexpected warmth anchoring me to reality while my world still tilted crazily sideways. Water dripped steadily from my hair onto the expensive fabric of his suit, but he didn't seem to notice or care in the slightest. "Vincent," he said quietly, and one of the men in dark suits stepped forward, a silent, efficient shadow. "Follow him." Quietly. "I want to know where he goes, who he calls, what he's planning." Vincent nodded once, a brief, sharp motion, and melted back into the shadows with a predator's fluid grace. The remaining guard positioned himself subtly near the restaurant's entrance, a silent, formidable sentinel against whatever other threats might emerge from Boston's shadowy underbelly. Only then did the stranger turn his full attention back to me. His piercing eyes swept over my soaked scrubs, lingering perceptibly on the fading bruise along my jawline, a mark that my hastily applied makeup hadn't quite managed to conceal. Something dangerous, something deeply unsettling, flickered in those storm-gray depths. "You're shivering." It wasn't a question, but a quiet observation, delivered in that same controlled, resonant voice. I was. My entire body trembled uncontrollably, whether from the gnawing cold, the lingering adrenaline, or the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of what had just happened, I couldn't tell. The relentless October rain had transformed my scrubs into a second skin, clinging uncomfortably to every curve, making me suddenly feel exposed and acutely vulnerable. "My car," he said, gesturing with a decisive flick of his wrist toward a sleek black sedan parked half a block away. Not an invitation. A statement. Every rational thought screamed at me to refuse, to offer a hollow thank you and simply walk away, to try and pretend this terrifying night had never happened. But Derek's desperate, frantic words echoed loudly in my mind. "I owe people money, Bella. Bad people." And now, this stranger had seen me, helped me, inextricably involved himself in whatever terrifying mess Derek had managed to create. "I don't even know your name," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. Something that might have been amusement, faint and fleeting, touched his lips. "Lorenzo Benedetti." The name hit me like a splash of ice water, a sudden, shocking jolt of recognition. Even someone as removed from Boston's criminal underbelly as I was knew that surname. Benedetti. Old money, old power, old violence, all meticulously wrapped in expensive suits and cloaked by legitimate businesses. I had just, in my desperation, grabbed the hand of a man whose family name regularly appeared in newspaper headlines and, often, FBI investigations. "You recognize it?" Again, not a question, but a knowing statement. I nodded mutely, suddenly acutely aware of how incredibly small and insignificant I felt standing next to him. At 5 feet 5 inches, I had to crane my neck painfully to meet his piercing gaze. He towered over me, an imposing figure of controlled strength and dangerous elegance. "Good. That means you understand the protection I can offer." His thumb traced a gentle, almost tender path across my knuckles. It was a gesture so surprisingly gentle it seemed utterly at odds with everything I'd heard about men like him. Yet, the price of refusing his protection, though unstated, was clear. The threat was velvet-wrapped but unmistakably present. I could accept his help and step, irrevocably, into his world, where I could decline and face Derek alone, with whatever bad people Derek owed money to now closing in. "What do you want from me?" My voice cracked on the last, desperate word. Lorenzo studied my face for a long, unsettling moment, rain still gathering in his dark hair and tracing sharp paths down the prominent planes of his cheekbones. "Right now? To get you somewhere warm and dry before you catch pneumonia." He guided me toward the sedan with a hand placed lightly at the small of my back, his touch burning, paradoxically, through the wet fabric of my scrubs. The car was a work of art, all gleaming paint and polished chrome that probably cost more than I made in 2 years. The interior smelled richly of leather and something expensive and distinctly masculine that made my pulse quicken unexpectedly. "Yeppy's restaurant," Lorenzo instructed the driver, his voice low and authoritative, as I settled into the butter-soft leather seats. "The penthouse." The penthouse. Of course, a man like Lorenzo Benedetti wouldn't just own the restaurant, he would own the entire building above it. Probably half the block, knowing his formidable reputation. As the car pulled smoothly into the glistening traffic, I caught sight of my reflection in the tinted window. Wet hair plastered to my skull, green eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer exhaustion, skin pale as porcelain. I realized with a grim certainty, like a drowned cat who had stumbled, utterly lost, into a tiger's den. "Tell me about Derek Morrison." Lorenzo's voice cut sharply through my unflattering self-assessment. I turned to find him watching me, those penetrating eyes unreadable in the dim interior lighting. "How do you know his last name?" "I make it my business to know things." He adjusted his cufflinks with precise, almost surgical movements. "Especially when those things involve men who put their hands on women in my territory." The casual possessiveness in his voice sent fresh shivers down my spine, shivers that had absolutely nothing to do with my wet clothes. Asterisk my territory. Asterisk as if Boston's North End belonged to him, personally. "We dated for 8 months, I said quietly, focusing intently on my hands, which were twisted tightly in my lap. I thought he was different. Protective instead of possessive. Strong instead of controlling." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped me. "Amazing how wrong you can be about someone." "When did it start?" "The violence." Heat flooded my cheeks. "How did you, the way you flinch when someone moves too quickly. The way you instinctively positioned yourself against that car door tonight, protecting your ribs." His gaze flicked, briefly, to the faint, fading bruise on my jaw. "The way you immediately assumed I wanted something from you in exchange for help." Each observation cut deeper than the last, exposing my deepest fears. Was I really that transparent? That obviously damaged? 3 months ago, I admitted, the words barely a whisper. A slap during an argument about money. He apologized, brought flowers, promised it would never happen again. But it did. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. It always got worse when he'd been drinking. And lately, he'd been drinking more. Said he was under pressure at work, that things were complicated. The car turned onto a narrow, cobblestone street lined with historic brownstones, their windows glowing warmly, invitingly, in the rain. Lorenzo's fingers drummed once, lightly, against his knee, the only sign of agitation, however subtle, that he had shown. What kind of pressure? I don't know. He never told me specifics. I watched the raindrops race down the window, distorting the city lights into abstract, shimmering patterns. But tonight, he said he owed money to bad people, that I could fix all his problems. Lorenzo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. By going with him. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway, the single word heavy with dread. Yes, Isabella. The way he said my name, with that faint, melodic accent curling around the syllables, made something flutter unexpectedly in my chest. Look at me. I turned reluctantly, meeting those storm-gray eyes in the car's dim interior. Derek Morrison is a dirty cop drowning in debt to people who view human life as currency. His voice carried absolute, chilling certainty. If you had gone with him tonight, you wouldn't have survived the week. The casual, almost clinical delivery of that statement hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. How can you possibly know that? Because I know who he owes money to. Lorenzo leaned forward slightly, the expensive fabric of his suit stretching tautly across his broad shoulders. Mikhail Kov. Russian mob. They don't negotiate, and they don't forgive debt. My mouth went instantly dry. Russians. But Derek's a cop. He works with the FBI task force, which makes him valuable to men like Kov, until he stops being useful. Lorenzo's smile held no warmth, no humanity. Then he becomes a liability to be eliminated. The car pulled to a smooth stop in front of an elegant brick building, its ground floor housing the very same upscale restaurant where I'd first grabbed Lorenzo's hand. Above it, multiple floors of expensive condominiums rose majestically into the rainy night, their numerous windows glowing like golden, watchful eyes. This is your building. Another statement, not a question. Yepes has been in my family for 3 generations, Lorenzo said, stepping out effortlessly into the rain, unconcerned by the sudden downpour. My great-grandfather built it when he first came to America. My grandfather expanded it. My father modernized it. He paused, rain already beginning to darken the expensive fabric of his suit. I inherited it when I was 25. The way he said inherited suggested the circumstances hadn't been natural, perhaps even violent. Men in Lorenzo's world, I instinctively knew, didn't simply retire to Florida and gracefully hand over the family business. The building's entrance was discreet yet undeniably elegant, all polished marble and subtle, artful lighting. A doorman, impeccably dressed, materialized from seemingly nowhere to escort us inside, his respectful, deferential nod to Lorenzo speaking volumes about the man beside me. The elevator itself was a work of art, all gleaming brass fixtures and mirrored panels that, to my dismay, reflected my bedraggled, pathetic appearance from multiple, unforgiving angles. Lorenzo stood beside me in comfortable, unhurried silence, his powerful presence completely filling the small, opulent space. I could smell his cologne now, something woody and expensive, utterly sophisticated, that probably cost more than my monthly rent. 60 floors, I observed, watching the numbers climb steadily. Privacy requires altitude. His lips quirked slightly, a subtle, almost mischievous curve. The higher you climb, the fewer people can reach you. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that quite literally took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of Boston's glittering skyline, stretching out below us like a jeweled tapestry. Rain streaked the immense glass, creating ever-shifting patterns that were formed with each gust of wind. The space itself was a study in understated luxury, clean lines, neutral, calming colors, furniture that probably cost more than my car. Everything spoke of wealth, but quiet wealth, the kind that didn't need to shout its presence to be profoundly heard. "You're still shivering," Lorenzo observed, his voice soft. I was. Despite the penthouse's obvious warmth, I couldn't seem to stop trembling. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving behind a crushing wave of exhaustion and the dawning, terrifying realization of what my life had become in the span of one terrifying hour. Lorenzo disappeared down a hallway and returned moments later with a thick terrycloth robe and a plush towel. "There's a guest bathroom through there," he said, pointing toward an archway. "Hot shower. Take as long as you need." The simple, unexpected kindness in the gesture nearly undid me. When, I wondered with a pang, was the last time someone had offered me comfort without expecting something, anything, in return? "Why are you helping me?" The question tumbled out before I could stop it, raw and unbidden. Lorenzo moved to the expansive window, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city below. Rain continued to lash against the glass, but from this dizzying height, the storm seemed distant, almost manageable, a mere whisper of its former fury. "Maybe I don't like seeing women afraid." He glanced back at me, and something in his expression, a fleeting intensity, made my pulse quicken. Or maybe I have my own reasons for wanting Derek Morrison to pay for his mistakes. Before I could even formulate a follow-up question, my phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. The sudden sound cut through the penthouse's serene quiet like a gunshot, making both of us tense. Derek's name glowed angrily on the screen. "Answer it," Lorenzo said quietly, his voice unnervingly calm. "Let him know you're safe." "Safe?" I stared at him, incredulous. "I'm in the penthouse of a man whose family protects what belongs to them." Lorenzo's storm-gray eyes met mine, and something passed between us, a current of understanding, or perhaps a chilling recognition. "You grabbed my hand tonight, Isabella. That makes you mine to protect." The phone continued buzzing, an insistent, unheeded demand. Outside, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the city, and I realized, with a profound, sinking certainty, that my life had just changed forever. The morning light filtering through Lorenzo's penthouse windows felt utterly surreal, like waking up inside someone else's life entirely. I sat at the marble kitchen island, my fingers wrapped around a coffee cup that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, watching Boston stretch out below in the golden autumn sunshine. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. 48 hours. That's how long I'd been here, playing the strangest, most bewildering game of house with a man whose very name made people cross the street. 2 days of borrowed silk pajamas, gourmet meals I couldn't pronounce, and the constant, nagging awareness that I was merely a guest in a gilded cage. "You're thinking too loud." Lorenzo's voice came from behind me, rich and lightly amused, startling me from my reverie. I turned to find him leaning casually against the kitchen doorway, dressed in charcoal slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves impeccably rolled up to his forearms. Even in this seemingly casual state, he radiated the kind of controlled power that made my pulse skip a beat. His dark hair was slightly mussed, and I caught myself wondering, with a strange intimacy, if he, too, had slept badly. "I should go home," I said for what felt like the third time since Friday night, my voice tinged with desperation. "I have a life, responsibilities, patients who need me. Dr. Martinez covered your shifts." He moved into the kitchen with that fluid grace I was beginning to recognize, pulling ingredients with practiced ease from the refrigerator. "Your supervisor was very understanding when I explained you were dealing with a family emergency." I stared at him, my mouth agape. You called my hospital without asking me? I called everyone who needed to know you were safe. Lorenzo cracked eggs into a bowl with practiced precision, his gaze unwavering. Your landlord knows you'll be away indefinitely. The nursing home where your mother lives received an anonymous donation to cover her care for the next 6 months. Each revelation hit me like a physical blow, a stunning display of his pervasive reach. You had no right. I had every right. His voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered, momentarily, in those storm-gray eyes. The moment you grabbed my hand, you became my responsibility. I'm not your responsibility. I'm not anyone's responsibility but my own. Lorenzo set down the whisk and turned to face me fully, his expression a formidable mask of resolve. In the morning light, I could discern details I had missed in the sodden darkness of that first night. The jagged scar bisecting his left eyebrow, a thin, stark white line, a testament to violence survived. The subtle stiffness in his right shoulder when he moved, a ghost of an old wound, as if he were constantly compensating. And the way his eyes, ever vigilant, ceaselessly scanned our surroundings, even here in his own home. Tell me about Derek Morrison's debts, he said, his gaze fixed on me, ignoring my protest entirely. I don't know anything about his debts. I told you that. Tell me what you do know. The clipped command hung in the air, not a request but an order. A sudden wave of exhaustion washed over me. Engaging Lorenzo felt like attempting to move a mountain with my bare hands, an impossible, draining task. He started acting strange about 4 months ago. Paranoid, jumpy. He'd get phone calls at odd hours and step outside to take them. Lorenzo resumed cooking, but I could feel his entire attention, sharp and unblinking, focused solely on my words. What kind of calls? I don't know. He always went to another room. I wrapped my hands tighter around the coffee cup, seeking its meager warmth. But after he'd hang up, he'd be agitated for hours. Sometimes he'd drink until he passed out. And the violence started around the same time. A flush of heat flooded my cheeks. Even after everything, recounting Derek's abuse felt like confessing to some inherent, fundamental failure within myself. Yes, he was taking his fear and frustration out on you because he couldn't take it out on the people who actually threatened him. Lorenzo's voice carried a chilling edge of controlled anger. Coward's behavior. The eggs hissed and sizzled as they met the heated pan, a jarringly domestic sound starkly at odds with the harrowing confession unfolding between us. Lorenzo moved around the kitchen with an easy, proprietary air, as if he had always belonged there, which genuinely surprised me. Men of his stature and influence typically employed others to manage such mundane, domestic tasks. You know how to cook, I observed, desperate to steer the conversation away from the bruising reality of Derek's fists. My grandmother insisted all her grandsons learn. Said we'd never find good women if we couldn't feed ourselves. A genuine, fleeting smile ghosted across his lips. She was a formidable woman, barely 5 feet tall, yet absolutely terrifying in her conviction. That fleeting glimpse of genuine warmth in his gaze made something unfamiliar flutter, low and unexpected, in my chest. She passed away when I was 26. Lived to see me take over the family business. Made sure I understood the responsibility that came with the name. His smile faded then. She would have liked you. How can you possibly know that? Lorenzo plated the eggs alongside perfectly toasted bread and fresh fruit, artfully arranged like a still life. Because you work in a children's hospital? Because you've been taking care of your mother alone for 3 years? Because when a violent drunk cornered you in a parking garage, your first instinct was to fight, not cower. He set the plate in front of me, and I caught the subtle scent of his cologne, a sophisticated blend, mingling with the aroma of the fresh breakfast, creating an atmosphere that was disturbingly, unsettlingly domestic. This moment of quiet breakfast conversation felt disturbingly normal, as if we were an ordinary couple discussing everyday trivialities, rather than a nurse held captive and her captor exchanging tales of grandmothers and recipes. "This isn't kidnapping," Lorenzo said, reading my unspoken thoughts with an unsettling, almost supernatural, accuracy. "This is survival. Then I can leave right now if I want." He was quiet for a long moment, his storm gray eyes studying my face with an unnerving intensity. "Where would you go? Back to your apartment where Derek knows you live? Back to the hospital where he knows you work? Back to visiting your mother where he knows you go every Sunday?" Each question hammered home the inescapable, horrifying truth I had so desperately sought to avoid. Derek had woven himself so deeply and thoroughly into the fabric of my life that there was truly no sanctuary, no place he couldn't find me. Nowhere I would truly be safe. "He's a police officer," I said weakly, clutching at a fragile hope. "There are rules, procedures." "Rules, Isabella, cease to apply to desperate men with crippling gambling debts." Lorenzo leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest, a picture of implacable resolve. "And they most assuredly do not apply to the formidable people Derek owes money to." I picked at the eggs, my appetite evaporating with a suddenness that made my stomach clench. "So, what's your solution?" "I hide in your penthouse forever." "My solution is simply that Derek Morrison ceases to be a problem." The quiet, absolute certainty in his tone sent a chill, cold and sharp, through my veins. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't need to worry about him anymore." "Lorenzo." I set down my fork, meeting his gaze directly, demanding an answer. "What does that mean?" For a moment, I saw something raw, almost untamed, flickered across his chiseled features. Not the perfectly controlled, dangerous man who had pulled me from the rain-soaked street, but someone younger, startlingly more vulnerable. Someone who had inherited terrible responsibilities at a tender 25, and learned to shoulder them with an elegant, almost brutal, efficiency. "It means I protect what is mine," he stated quietly, his voice a low rumble. "By any means necessary." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed against the marble countertop. Lorenzo glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. The fleeting moment of vulnerability vanished, replaced instantly by an aura of cold, unyielding professionalism. "Vincent," he answered on the second ring, his voice crisp. In the kitchen's acoustics, I could hear both sides of the conversation. "Boss, we have a problem. Morrison's been asking questions. Hit up 3 of his contacts in narcotics trying to get information on you." Lorenzo's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "What kind of information?" "Security details. Where you live, where you go, who you see. He's also been flashing pictures of the girl around the North End." My blood ran cold, turning to ice water in my veins. Derek was actively hunting me, using his badge and police connections to track me down, and now he was specifically targeting Lorenzo. "Any bites?" Lorenzo's voice remained unnervingly steady, yet I caught the subtle, telltale tension coiling in his shoulders. "Nothing solid, but boss, word is he's not working alone anymore. Someone's backing him. Someone with resources." "Cough," Lorenzo murmured, a grim certainty in his tone. "That's what I'm thinking. Morrison's not smart enough to plan this kind of operation solo." Lorenzo ended the call and set the phone down with deliberate, almost surgical, care. When he looked at me, his eyes were completely devoid of warmth, like polished gray stones. "Pack whatever you need for a few days." His voice was now entirely businesslike, devoid of personal inflection. "We're leaving the city." "Leaving?" A cold wave of panic fluttered, frantic and insistent, in my chest. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere Derek Morrison and his Russian friends can't reach you." Lorenzo was already moving, pulling his phone back out to make another call. "Marco, prepare the house in Gloucester. Full security team. We'll be there by noon." "Wait." I stood up abruptly, my breakfast entirely forgotten. You can't just decide to relocate me without consulting me first. Lorenzo paused in his preparations, and when he turned back to me, I saw something that made my breath catch. Not anger, exactly, but something deeper, more primal. Possession. You asked me to help you, he said quietly. This, Isabella, he said, his voice quiet but firm, is what help looks like in my world. You do not get to pick and choose which parts of my protection you accept. I'm not your property. No. He stepped closer, his presence commanding, his gaze unwavering. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back significantly to meet his unwavering gaze. You're something far more valuable than that. What am I, then? For a heartbeat, he didn't answer. Then his hand lifted, cupping my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw with surprising, almost reverent, gentleness. His touch was warm, calloused in a way that suggested an intimate familiarity with violence, yet he chose to be profoundly gentle with me. You're the first person in 10 years, he whispered, his voice barely above a breath, who looked at me and saw someone worth saving, instead of someone to fear. That, he finished, his voice raw, makes you irreplaceable. Before I could respond, he stepped back, the fleeting moment of vulnerability gone as quickly as it had come. Pack light, he said, already moving toward his own room. We have 30 minutes before the car arrives. I stood frozen in the opulent kitchen, my cheek still burning from the lingering warmth of his touch, utterly unable to process what had just transpired. Lorenzo Benedetti, the man whose name alone struck fear into the heart of Boston's criminal underworld, had just revealed something profoundly raw and desperately human beneath his meticulously controlled exterior. And God help me, I found myself desperate to understand the full weight of his words. The efficient, methodical sound of drawers opening and closing came from his bedroom. Whatever safe house he was taking me to, it was clearly well prepared and completely secure. Another piece of the vast, intricate machinery he had built around himself, designed to protect and control in equal measure. I touched my cheek where his hand had been, still feeling the echo of his warmth. Just 48 hours ago, I had been a simple pediatric nurse, burdened by an abusive ex-boyfriend and insurmountable medical bills. Now, I was the protected asset of a man who could, with a mere phone call, make people disappear. The truly terrifying part wasn't that Lorenzo frightened me, the terrifying part was that he didn't. Not anymore. The safe house in Gloucester sat perched precariously on rocky cliffs, gazing out over the vast, turbulent Atlantic. Its weathered shingles and broad wraparound porch gave it the deceptive appearance of a quaint, charming New England cottage. But the illusion shattered the moment my gaze snagged on the discreetly placed cameras, the undeniably reinforced windows, and the vigilant way Lorenzo's men strategically positioned themselves around the perimeter of the sprawling property. 3 days. 3 surreal days spent walking along isolated private beaches, curled up reading in sun-drenched window seats, and attempting to pretend this was some sort of unexpected romantic getaway rather than a heavily guarded protective custody. The crisp October air carried the salt tang of approaching winter, and I'd taken to bundling myself in one of Lorenzo's thick sweaters while I sat on the porch, watching seabirds wheel against the slate-gray sky. Lorenzo had been the perfect gentleman, maintaining a respectful distance, engaging in polite, impersonal conversation. There had been no repeat of that intense moment in his penthouse kitchen when his hand had cupped my cheek and made my pulse stutter. It should have been reassuring, that meticulous respect for my space. Instead, it left me feeling restless and profoundly confused, my senses hyper-aware of his presence in ways that had nothing, surprisingly, to do with fear. The sunrise here is extraordinary. His voice came from behind me, rich, deep, and imbued with that faint, tantalizing accent that never failed to make my skin prickle with an unwelcome awareness. I didn't turn around, too afraid he'd see something in my expression I wasn't ready to acknowledge, not even to myself. It's beautiful. Peaceful. Peaceful is good, he murmured, his gaze distant. Peaceful keeps you alive. Lorenzo settled into the porch chair beside me, extending a steaming mug of coffee. Vincent called. Derek Morrison visited your hospital yesterday. My blood instantly turned to ice. What did he want? He asked to speak with your supervisor, Lorenzo replied, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Claimed he was concerned about your welfare, said you'd been acting erratically before you disappeared. Dr. Martinez didn't buy it, I guessed, my voice trembling as I sat down my coffee with unsteady fingers. No. Told him patient confidentiality prevented her from discussing your personal situation. He's not going to give up, is he? No. Lorenzo leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his posture a study in coiled power. Men like Derek don't surrender easily, especially when they're desperate. The morning sun caught in the deep, dark strands of his hair, illuminating faint threads of silver I hadn't noticed before. At 34, Lorenzo carried himself with the profound, weary confidence of someone who had seen too much, survived too much. The subtle lines etched around his eyes were not signs of age, but a testament to sleepless nights and countless difficult, often brutal, decisions. Tell me about your father. The words, raw and demanding, tumbled out before I could possibly stop them. Lorenzo went very still, his gaze fixed on the churning Atlantic. Why do you want to know? Because you said you inherited the family business when you were 25, I pressed, turning fully to face him, my voice unwavering. Because yesterday, I watched you order a man's execution over the phone as casually as if you were discussing the weather. I need to understand who you really are. For a long, tense moment, he said nothing. Then he rose, moving with that fluid, almost predatory grace I had come to recognize, to the porch railing. His hands gripped the worn wood, knuckles stark white with barely contained tension. My father was Antonio Benedetti, third-generation Italian-American. He built our legitimate construction business from absolutely nothing, Lorenzo explained, his voice carefully neutral, detached. He believed deeply in old-world values, family, loyalty, honor. And the other business, he continued, a subtle shift in his tone, the illegal side, that came later. Protection money from shop owners who couldn't afford reliable police response times. Loans for families who couldn't secure bank approval. Dispute resolution for people the official courts simply ignored. A fleeting, humorless smile touched Lorenzo's lips. It started as helping the community. It evolved, inevitably, into controlling it. A brisk gust of salt air whipped across the porch, carrying the lonely cry of seagulls and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the jagged rocks below. Lorenzo's profile, sharp and unyielding, was silhouetted against the brightening morning sky, a study in angular planes and tightly controlled strength. How did he die? I asked softly, my voice barely a whisper. Car bomb, Lorenzo replied, his voice never wavering, yet I saw his knuckles whiten further, almost painfully. Outside his favorite restaurant, on a Tuesday night in October. The COF organization wanted our territory. They thought eliminating the head would scatter the family. But it didn't. He turned back to me then, and I saw something raw and primal flicker, deep within those storm-gray eyes. It just made the survivors more dangerous. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed insistently against the porch table. Lorenzo glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor changed instantly, his shoulders tensing perceptibly as he read the message. What is it, Vincent? Derek Morrison isn't working alone anymore. Lorenzo was already moving, pulling out his phone to make a call, his movements swift and decisive. They grabbed Sarah Chen from the pediatric ward at St. Mary's 20 minutes ago. My entire world tilted sideways, a sickening lurch. Sarah. Sweet, quiet Sarah, a nurse from the Philippines who often worked the same shifts as me. We'd shared coffee dozens of times, exchanged stories of difficult patients and impossible supervisors. They took Sarah. My voice came out as a horrified whisper. They think she's you. Lorenzo's phone was already ringing. "Vincent, talk to me." I could hear Vincent's voice through the speaker, tight with tension. Two men in a van grabbed her outside the hospital pharmacy. Professional job. But boss, they messed up. Chen's got distinctive tattoos on her arms. Nothing like Isabella's description. How long before they realize their mistake? Maybe an hour. Maybe less if they're smart enough to check her ID. Lorenzo's face had transformed, going granite hard, all traces of the man who'd just shared intimate stories about his formidable grandmother vanishing behind a mask of cold, ruthless calculation. Coughs people. Has to be. Morrison doesn't have the resources for an operation this clean. My hand started shaking uncontrollably. They'll kill her when they realize she's not me. No, Lorenzo's voice cut through my rising panic, sharp and absolute. They won't. How can you possibly know that? I demanded. He ended the call, then turned to face me fully. And what I saw in his expression made my breath catch, a sudden gasp. It wasn't just anger, it was something primitive, fiercely protective, that spoke to deep, dormant places in my chest I'd thought Derek had killed forever. Because I'm going to get her back. Lorenzo was already moving toward the house, his movements sharp and purposeful. Marco. One of his men appeared instantly, as if he'd been waiting for the summons. Boss, contact every asset we have in Boston. I want immediate locations on Koff's operation, full intelligence on his men, and a precise tactical assessment of where they're most likely holding the girl. You want me to call in favors from the families? Marco asked, his voice tight. Call in everything, Lorenzo's voice carried absolute, unyielding authority. And get the car ready. We're heading back to the city. I stood up so quickly, my chair scraped loudly against the porch floor. We? You're not staying here while an innocent woman suffers because of the danger following you around. Lorenzo's eyes met mine, and I saw something there that made my pulse stutter, a fierce glint of expectation. Besides, you're going to help me get her back. I don't understand. You're a nurse, Isabella. You understand medical procedures, hospital layouts, staff rotations. Lorenzo stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne mingled with the sharp salt air and something darker, more primal. And you know Saracen personally. You can identify her positively. Make sure we're rescuing the right person. The logic, on the surface, was sound. But underneath it lay something more profound, a test, perhaps, or a stark declaration. Lorenzo was inviting me into his world completely, showing me the full, uncompromising scope of his protection. This is dangerous, I stated, though even as the words left my lips, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had already made my decision. Everything worthwhile is dangerous, he countered, his voice a low rumble. His hand came up again, cupping my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw, just as it had that morning in his kitchen. The question is whether you trust me to keep you safe while we save your friend. His touch sent a searing heat spiraling through my chest, awakening dormant responses I'd thought Derek had beaten out of me forever. Standing there on that windswept porch, with the vast Atlantic stretching endlessly before us and danger rapidly closing in from behind, I realized something that, by all rights, should have terrified me. I did trust him. Completely. Without reservation. What do you need me to do? I asked, my voice steady. Something subtle shifted in Lorenzo's expression. Not surprise, precisely, but a deep, almost palpable satisfaction, as if I had just passed some crucial test he had been waiting for me to undertake. First, you're going to tell me everything you know about St. Mary's security protocols and shift changes. His hand dropped from my face, but the warmth of his touch lingered. Then, you're going to help me plan Sarah Chen's rescue. And after that? Lorenzo's smile was sharp as a freshly honed blade, twice as dangerous. After that, You're going to watch me teach Derek Morrison and his Russian friends precisely what happens when they threaten what's mine. The sheer, unadulterated possessiveness in his voice should have chilled me to the bone, should have frightened me. Instead, it sent a thrilling current of anticipation down my spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the growing, undeniable certainty that Lorenzo Benedetti was about to go to war. And somehow, impossibly, I wanted to stand beside him when he did. "When do we leave?" I asked, the words a challenge. 1 hour. Lorenzo was already heading toward the house, his movements sharp with renewed purpose. "Pack light and dress dark. Where we're going, visibility gets people killed." I watched him disappear inside, then turned back to the ocean one last time. The peaceful morning had shattered completely, replaced by the bitter, metallic taste of approaching violence. Sarah was in grave danger because of me, because I had, in a desperate moment, grabbed a stranger's hand and inadvertently dragged an innocent woman into a ruthless war between dangerous men. Yet, as I followed Lorenzo into the house, one thought echoed in my mind with startling, almost exhilarating, clarity. For the first time in months, I wasn't running from the fight. I was running toward it. The manila folder on Lorenzo's desk contained my entire life, meticulously reduced to a series of photographs and printed reports. Bank statements detailing my mother's escalating medical bills, employment records from St. Mary's, even copies of text messages I'd exchanged with colleagues about picking up extra shifts. Everything was there, laid out with a chilling, almost clinical precision that made my skin crawl with unease. "How long have you been watching me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Lorenzo stood behind his desk in the penthouse study, hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the Boston skyline. We had returned from Gloucester just 3 hours ago, Sarah's rescue mission already meticulously planned down to the minute. But first, it seemed, came this raw moment of truth. "Vincent has been conducting background checks on everyone in your social circle since Friday night." His reflection in the window, stark against the glittering city, looked carved from unyielding stone. "Standard security protocol when someone enters my protection." "That's not what I asked," I retorted, my voice trembling. I furiously flipped through pages of surveillance photos, me leaving the hospital, me visiting my mother, me grocery shopping on a Tuesday afternoon, completely oblivious to the fact I was being meticulously documented. "These photos go back weeks, Lorenzo. Maybe months." He turned slowly then, and the expression on his face confirmed the chilling suspicion that had already begun to form. 6 months? The admission hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. 6 months? You've been stalking me for 6 months? "I've been watching you," he corrected, his voice maddeningly calm, unruffled. "There's a difference." "Is there?" I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been planning this entire thing from the very beginning." Lorenzo moved around the desk with that predatory grace, stopping just close enough that I had to tilt my head back significantly to meet his unwavering eyes. "Planning what, exactly?" he challenged, his gaze unwavering. "This. Us? Whatever this is supposed to be." I gestured wildly around the opulent study, encompassing the protected penthouse, the carefully constructed cage he had built around me. "Did you orchestrate Derek's debt, too? Manipulate him, ensure he'd get desperate enough to threaten me, just so you'd have an excuse to swoop in and play the heroic savior?" Something cold and dangerous flickered, like lightning, in those storm-gray eyes. "Be very careful what you accuse me of, Isabella." "Or what?" I challenged, fueled by a surge of betrayal and growing panic. "You'll have me disappeared, just like you're planning to do to Derek?" "How do I know any of this is real? How do I know Derek wasn't working for you all along?" Lorenzo's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin, but his voice remained remarkably level. "Because if Derek Morrison was working for me, Isabella, you would never have suffered a single bruise at his hands." The quiet, absolute certainty in his statement gave me a momentary pause, but I was too consumed by anger to back down. Then why? Why watch me? Why choose me? For a long, tense moment, Lorenzo said nothing. Then he moved with deliberate grace to a polished cabinet against the far wall, withdrawing a crystal decanter and two elegant glasses. His movements were precise, controlled, yet I caught the faintest tremor in his hands as he poured. "Do you know what it's like to inherit a legacy built on blood?" he asked, not looking at me, his voice strangely distant. "To wake up one morning and discover that everything you thought you knew about your life was a carefully constructed lie?" I remained utterly silent, sensing, with a prickle of intuition, that this was important, that whatever he was about to reveal would irrevocably change everything between us. "I was 25 when my father died," he continued, finally turning to hand me a glass, his fingers brushing mine. "A business major from Harvard, completely insulated from the family's real operations. I thought we were simply construction contractors who occasionally lent a helping hand to struggling families in the neighborhood." The whiskey burned a fierce path down my throat, but I welcomed the searing distraction. "When did you learn the truth?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "At his funeral," Lorenzo replied, his tone devoid of emotion. "When Mikhail Klov approached me to offer his condolences and, with chilling candor, explained the true nature of his business relationship with Antonio Benedetti." Lorenzo's ensuing laugh held no humor, a brittle sound that cracked in the heavy air. Apparently, my father-in-law had been quietly expanding his operations, encroaching upon territories the Russians considered exclusively theirs. "So, Klov killed him," Lorenzo stated flatly. "Klov ordered it. And Derek Morrison planted the bomb." His eyes, cold as slate, met mine over the rim of his glass. "Your ex-boyfriend murdered my father, Isabella. That's why he owes the Russians money. That's why they own him completely." The revelation hit me like a bucket of ice water, a numbing shock. Derek hadn't just been abusive, he was a killer, a bomb maker who had shattered Lorenzo's family for money. "You knew," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "When I grabbed your hand that night, you already knew who Derek was." "I knew Derek Morrison was a dirty cop, deep in debt to Russian criminals," Lorenzo confirmed, his voice low and steady. "I knew he'd killed my father." Lorenzo set down his glass, the clink echoing in the silence, and stepped closer. "What I didn't know," he continued, "was that he'd been using his badge to terrorize an innocent woman for months." "But you'd been watching me," I accused, backing away until my shoulders met the cold glass of the window. "Following me." "Why?" "Because Derek Morrison mentioned you during one of his increasingly desperate calls to his Russian handlers." Lorenzo's voice dropped, becoming unexpectedly intimate. "He told them about his ex-girlfriend, the pretty nurse who worked at St. Mary's, how she'd be perfect collateral if they needed leverage." My blood turned to ice. He was planning to sell me. He was planning to offer me as payment for his monstrous debt, interest on what he owed for my father-in-law's murder. Lorenzo reached out, his fingers ghosting along my jawline. "I started watching you to understand what kind of weapon Derek thought he had," he explained, his touch sending shivers through me. "What I found was something entirely different." "What did you find?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "A woman who worked double shifts to pay for her mother's care," he listed, his gaze intense. "Who volunteered at the children's hospital on her days off. Who smiled at homeless people and bought coffee for strangers and treated every patient like they were family." His thumb traced a path across my cheekbone, a feather-light touch. "A woman who deserved protection, not exploitation." The unexpected gentleness in his touch made my chest ache with a complex mix of vulnerability and burgeoning hope. "So, you decided to protect me," I stated, more than asked. "I decided to understand you," Lorenzo corrected softly. "To learn your patterns, your routines, the things that made you feel safe." His other hand came up, framing my face completely, his thumbs resting just beneath my eyes. I told myself it was reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, but it wasn't. No, his voice was barely above a whisper, it was obsession. The admission hung between us like a live wire, dangerously potent and electric. Lorenzo's hands on my face were warm, steady, a stark contrast to Derek's violent possessiveness. This was different, darker, perhaps, but infinitely more careful. You could have approached me differently, I said, struggling to process it all. Told me about Derek's debt, warned me about the danger. And you would have gone to the police, Lorenzo finished for me, his smile as sharp as a blade. Filed reports, trusted the system to protect you. He shook his head slowly. Derek Morrison is the system, Isabella. He would have buried your complaints and escalated his timeline, putting you in even more immediate peril. So instead, I countered, the bitterness rising, you waited for him to corner me in a parking garage. I waited for you to need me, he admitted, his gaze unwavering. His hands dropped from my face, and immediately I missed their warmth, a surprising ache. I waited for circumstances to align, he continued, so that when I offered you protection, you'd be desperate enough to accept it. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and execution. Lorenzo hadn't simply saved me from Derek's violence, he had strategically positioned himself to be available, indispensable, when that violence finally escalated beyond my ability to handle it alone. I should be furious, I said quietly, the words feeling inadequate. You should be, Lorenzo agreed, moving back to his desk, putting a deliberate distance between us. You should demand I take you somewhere safe and leave you alone forever. He leaned against the polished wood, his silhouette dark against the city lights. You should run as far and as fast as you can from what I represent. But I wasn't going to. No. He looked up, and I saw something unexpectedly vulnerable flicker in those gray eyes. No. I crossed the space he'd created, closing the distance between us once more. Because Sarah is still out there, scared and alone, I explained, my voice firm. Because Derek Morrison helped murder your father. And because, despite everything you've done, I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone. Lorenzo went utterly still. You manipulated the situation, I pressed, my gaze searching his. Yes, he conceded. You watched me without consent, invaded my privacy, orchestrated circumstances to make yourself indispensable. I reached up, cupping his face the way he had done to me, feeling the rough stubble against my palm. But you also paid my mother's medical bills anonymously. You made sure I was safe at work. You never let Derek hurt me worse than he already had. That doesn't excuse what I've done, he murmured, his eyes holding a dark self-reproach. No, it doesn't, I agreed, stepping closer until there was no space left between us, my body pressed against his. But it explains why you did it. And right now, understanding you matters more to me than forgiving you for a heartbeat. Neither of us moved, suspended in the charged silence. Then, Lorenzo's control shattered completely. He kissed me with a hunger that spoke of months of careful distance, of watching from the shadows and wanting what he couldn't have. His hands tangled in my hair, holding me steady as he claimed my mouth with devastating thoroughness. I kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring weeks of confusion, attraction, and desperate need into the contact. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against mine. This changes everything, he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. I know, I whispered. Once we save Sarah, once we deal with Derek and Claude, you'll be free to leave, to go back to your normal life. His eyes searched mine, a profound question in their depths. But if you stay, if you choose this, there's no going back. My world doesn't offer second chances or clean exits. I thought about my cramped apartment, my lonely shifts at the hospital, the small, safe life I'd meticulously built for myself. Then I thought about the way Lorenzo looked at me, like I was something precious and dangerous and utterly worth protecting at any cost. I'm not going anywhere, I told him, the certainty solid within me. Something fierce and possessive flared in his expression. You're sure? Instead of answering, I kissed him again, soft and certain and full of burgeoning promise. When I pulled back, Lorenzo's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Then let's go get your friend back. Sarah was alive, terrified but miraculously alive, cable-tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse near Boston Harbor. Her dark hair was matted with dried blood from where they'd struck her during the kidnapping. Through my binoculars, I could clearly see the distinctive cherry blossom tattoo on her left forearm, confirmation that Clove's men had indeed grabbed the wrong woman. 12 men that we can count, Vincent murmured into his comms device. 2 on the roof, for patrolling the perimeter, 6 inside with the hostage. I crouched beside Lorenzo behind a rusted shipping container, my heart hammering against my ribs as we surveyed the warehouse from our concealed position. The salt air carried the tang of low tide and diesel fuel, mixing with the metallic taste of approaching violence that seemed to coat everything in Lorenzo's world. Where's Derek? Lorenzo's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried deadly intent. No sign of him yet, boss, but we got a problem, Vincent's voice crackled through the earpiece. Lucas just called in. Clove's people grabbed Clara Martinez 20 minutes ago. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Lucas was Lorenzo's younger brother, his second in command and most trusted lieutenant. Clara was Lucas's girlfriend, a sweet archaeology student who taught children's art classes on weekends. She had nothing to do with any of this, except the misfortune of loving a Benedetti. Lorenzo's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his voice remained controlled. Where? Outside her apartment near BU campus. Professional job, same as the nurse. 3 men, black SUV, gone in under 30 seconds. Vincent's voice was strained. Lucas. Lucas is compromised. Emotional, desperate, likely to make stupid decisions that get people killed, Lorenzo finished the thought with cold precision. I touched his arm, feeling the coiled tension beneath his jacket sleeve. We can save them both. No. Lorenzo's eyes never left the warehouse as he spoke. We save Sarah first, methodically, according to plan. Then we deal with Clara and whatever leverage Clove thinks he has over my brother. The calculating coldness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it was oddly reassuring. This was Lorenzo in his element, compartmentalizing emotions to focus on tactical necessities, the kind of man who could dismantle an enemy's entire operation while maintaining perfect control. What about the inside team? I asked, studying the warehouse layout through the binoculars. Marco and Tony are positioned at the north entrance. Vincent's team has the east side covered. Lorenzo adjusted his position slightly, and I caught the gleam of the handgun holstered beneath his jacket. You and I go in through the loading dock, quick and quiet. And if something goes wrong? I pressed. Lorenzo's smile was sharp as broken glass, a chilling promise. Then Mikhail Clove learns precisely why my father built this organization to survive his death. We moved across the open ground between containers like ghosts, using the deep shadows and strategic timing to avoid the roving patrols. Lorenzo moved with the fluid precision of someone who had done this many times before, and his unwavering confidence steadied my nerves, even as adrenaline flooded my system. The loading dock was secured with a chain-link gate that Vincent had already cut, leaving an opening just wide enough for us to slip through. Inside, the warehouse was a disorienting maze of stacked pallets and industrial equipment, all draped in shadows that seemed to move and shift in the dim, flickering lighting. Sarah's voice reached us before we saw her, weak but defiantly stubborn as she spoke to her captors in broken English mixed with Tagalog curses that would have made her grandmother proud. American police will find you, she was saying, her accent thick with fear, but her tone unyielding. You cannot hide forever. A Russian-accented voice responded with cruel laughter. Police already know where you are, little bird. Police brought you to us. Derek. It had to be Derek, feeding information to Klaus' operation, using his badge and connections to facilitate kidnappings in broad daylight. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected, not because I still harbored any feelings for him, but because it confirmed how completely I'd misjudged someone I'd once trusted. Lorenzo gestured for me to stay back, his movements economical as he moved closer to the main area where they were holding Sarah. Through gaps in the stacked crates, I could see her clearly now, cable tied to a metal folding chair, her St. Mary's scrubs torn and stained, but her chin lifted in defiance even as tears tracked down her cheeks. 3 men stood around her, 2 Russians in expensive, tailored suits, and one who made my blood run cold. Derek Morrison, still in his police uniform, his badge gleaming ironically under the warehouse's fluorescent lights as he leaned casually against a workbench. "This is taking too long," Derek was saying, checking his watch impatiently. "Benedetti should have made contact by now." "Patience," replied one of the Russians, a thin man with silver hair and cold, reptilian eyes. "Fear makes men sloppy. Let him worry about his woman a little longer." "She's not his woman. She's my ex-girlfriend, and she's nothing special." Derek's voice carried the bitter, resentful edge I remembered from our worst fights. "Isabella Rossi is a nobody nurse with more debt than sense. Then why does Lorenzo Benedetti protect her like she's family?" The Russian stepped closer to Sarah, who instinctively shrank back in her chair. "Why does he move her to a safe house? Why does he mobilize his entire organization when she disappears?" Derek had no answer for that, and I saw a flicker of genuine uncertainty cross his features. He'd clearly expected Lorenzo's interest in me to be casual, temporary. The sheer depth of resources being deployed to ensure my safety clearly surprised and unnerved him. Lorenzo's hand touched my shoulder, a silent signal, and I turned to find him gesturing toward a side corridor that would bring us closer to Sarah's position. We moved together, our steps light and careful, avoiding the creaking floorboards and scattered metal debris that littered the warehouse floor. "The other girl is more valuable," Derek said suddenly, his voice carrying a desperate, almost pleading edge. "Clara Martinez. She's dating Benedetti's brother." "That's real leverage, perhaps." The Russian smile was coldly amused. "But this one serves our purposes for now. When Benedetti arrives to negotiate, we will have answers to interesting questions." He paused, his gaze sweeping over Sarah, making her whimper softly. "And if he doesn't come, then we send pieces of his woman to Lucas Benedetti until he becomes more cooperative." The casual brutality in the Russian's voice was the final trigger. That's when Lorenzo moved. He emerged from the shadows like death incarnate, a blur of lethal precision that spoke of years of honed practice and absolutely no hesitation about violence. The first Russian never even saw him coming. Lorenzo's arm snaked around his throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery until the man dropped unconscious to the concrete floor, a soft thud. The second Russian spun toward the sound, hand instinctively reaching for the gun holstered beneath his jacket, but Lorenzo was already there. A vicious strike to the solar plexus doubled the man over, followed by a brutal knee to the face that sent him crashing backward into a stack of wooden pallets with a resounding clatter. Derek fumbled for his service weapon, but his hands were shaking, his movements clumsy with panic. "Benedetti, I know you're here." "Yes, you do," Lorenzo's voice cut through the air, completely calm despite having just incapacitated 2 trained killers in under 10 seconds. He stepped into the light, a figure of implacable resolve. "The question is whether you're smart enough to surrender." "I've got backup coming." Derek stammered, his gun finally clear of its holster but wavering wildly as he tried to aim at Lorenzo. "This warehouse is surrounded." "Your backup consists of Mikhail Klaus's men," Lorenzo replied, his smile terrifying in its complete lack of emotion, "most of whom are currently unconscious or dead. My people are significantly better trained than yours." As if to emphasize his point, the warehouse lights suddenly went out, plunging everything into darkness except for the pale, ethereal glow filtering through the high windows. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, casting everything in a hellish red hue that made the scene look like something torn from a nightmare. Isabella. Derek's voice cracked, raw with fear and desperation as he spun around, searching the shifting shadows. I know you're here, too. This is all your fault. If you'd just come with me Friday night, none of this would have happened. I stepped into the ominous red light before Lorenzo could stop me, facing the man who had terrorized me for months. In the infernal glow, Derek looked older, more desperate, his eyes hollowed by the kind of desperation that made men dangerous. You're right, I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady. If I'd gone with you Friday night, I'd be dead by now, just like you're going to be. Derek's gun swung wildly toward me, but Lorenzo was faster. The shot that rang out echoed through the vast warehouse like thunder, but it wasn't Derek who fired. Lorenzo's bullet took Derek's center mass, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the concrete floor. He dropped to his knees, hands pressed against the rapidly spreading red stain on his uniform shirt, looking up at me with something that might have been profound surprise. You chose him, Derek whispered, blood frothing at the corners of his mouth. Over me, over everything we had. We never had anything, I told him, surprised by the unwavering clarity of my voice. You had control, and I had fear. That's not love, Derek. That's just violence wrapped in pretty words. Derek Morrison died still looking confused about the distinction. I should have felt something watching the man who had dominated my nightmares for months bleed out on a warehouse floor. Relief, maybe, or grim satisfaction, or even a flicker of grief for what we might have been under different circumstances. Instead, I felt nothing at all, except a strange sense of completion, like closing a book I'd never wanted to read in the first place. Lorenzo was already moving towards Sarah, producing a tactical knife to swiftly cut through her restraints. She collapsed forward the moment she was free, sobbing with a mixture of overwhelming relief and lingering terror as I rushed to check her for serious injuries. Sarah, it's okay, I soothed, cradling her head. It's Isabella. You're safe now. I ran my hands over her arms and head, checking for fractures or signs of concussion. Can you tell me where it hurts? Everywhere, she whispered, clinging to my hands like a lifeline. They said they were going to kill me. Said they were going to cut off pieces and send them to someone named Benedetti. That's not going to happen. Lorenzo appeared beside us, his voice surprisingly gentle in a way that seemed utterly at odds with the violence he'd just unleashed. You're under my protection now, Miss Chen. No one will hurt you again. Sarah looked between us, intelligence flickering in her dark eyes despite the trauma. You're him. The man Isabella grabbed. I am, Lorenzo affirmed. And you came to save me, Sarah murmured, a fresh wave of tears forming. We both did, I corrected, a small smile gracing my lips. Lorenzo's gaze met mine over Sarah's head, and something profound passed between us that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with the choice I'd made to stand beside him in his world of shadows and violence. What about Clara? I asked, as we carefully helped Sarah to her feet. Lorenzo's expression hardened again, the gentle protector disappearing behind the familiar mask of the dawn. Now we get my brother's girlfriend back, and then Mikhail Klov learns exactly what it costs to threaten a Benedetti. As we made our way toward the warehouse exit, Sarah leaning heavily on my arm and Lorenzo's men materializing from the shadows to escort us to safety, I realized something that should have terrified me. I wasn't just leaving Lorenzo's world anymore. I was becoming part of it. The phone call came at 3 o'clock in the morning, shattering the fragile peace Lorenzo and I had managed to build during the 24 hours since Sarah's rescue. I jerked awake in his arms, my heart hammering against my ribs as the ringtone cut through the penthouse's silence like a blade. Lorenzo was instantly alert, reaching for his phone with the honed reflexes of a man who had learned to expect danger during vulnerable moments. The caller ID made his jaw tighten with lethal intent. Lucas, he answered without preamble, his voice sharp with controlled tension. I could hear his brother's voice through the speaker, rough with desperation and barely controlled panic. They want to make a trade, Enzo. Clara for Isabella. Tomorrow night at midnight, Pier 47. My blood turned to ice water. Despite everything we'd done, despite Derek's death and the success of the rescue mission, Mikhail Klov still had leverage. He still had the power to force Lorenzo's hand by threatening innocent people. Is Clara alive? Lorenzo's question was clinical, emotionless, but I felt the tension coiling through his muscles like a living thing. They let me speak to her for 30 seconds. She's scared, but unharmed. For now, Lucas's voice cracked slightly. Enzo, they're going to kill her if we don't comply. Klov made that very clear. Lorenzo sat up, running a hand through his dark hair as his mind processed a cascade of tactical possibilities. How many men does he have with him? I counted 12 during the exchange, Lucas replied. But there could be more positioned around the pier. Lucas paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of desperate pleading I'd never heard from Lorenzo's usually controlled younger brother. They want Isabella, Enzo. Specifically her. Klov said he's been planning something special for the woman who caused him so much trouble. I slipped out of bed, pulling on one of Lorenzo's shirts as I moved to the window overlooking Boston Harbor. Somewhere out there, Clara Martinez was being held by men who viewed human life as mere currency, who would torture and kill her without hesitation if their demands weren't met. It's a trap, I said quietly, not turning from the window. Klov knows you'd never hand me over willingly. He's counting on us trying to rescue Clara, walking into whatever kill box he's prepared. Lorenzo's reflection appeared in the glass behind me, his expression carved from stone. You're right, which is why we're not going to play by his rules. He spoke into the phone, his eyes holding mine in the window's reflection. Lucas? Are you listening? I'm here. Tell me about the pier. Security cameras, escape routes, structural weaknesses, everything you observed during the meeting. For the next 20 minutes, Lucas provided detailed intelligence about Pier 47, its layout, and the positions he'd seen Klov's men occupy. I listened with growing dread as the scope of the trap became chillingly clear. The pier was isolated, surrounded by water on 3 sides, with limited access points and no cover for approaching rescuers. It's a killing ground, Vincent's voice came through as Lorenzo conference called his lieutenant. Classic ambush setup. They're not planning to let anyone walk away from this exchange. Then we don't go to the exchange, I said, turning from the window to face Lorenzo directly. We find where they're holding Clara and extract her before the meeting. Lorenzo's smile was sharp as broken glass, a glint of shared understanding. My thoughts exactly. What followed was the most intense planning session of my life. Lorenzo transformed from protective lover into tactical commander, deploying resources with surgical precision while coordinating with contacts throughout Boston's intricate criminal underworld. I watched in fascination as he became the man who had built an empire from his father's blood, commanding absolute loyalty through a potent combination of respect and carefully applied fear. Klov's using the old fish processing plant on Turner Street, Vincent reported after 2 hours of reconnaissance. Heavy security, but our inside man confirmed Clara's being held in the main office on the 2nd floor. Inside man? I asked, surprised. Lorenzo's expression was grim. One of Klov's lieutenants has gambling debts to our casino. Sometimes, financial leverage proves a far more potent weapon than a hail of bullets. By the first light of dawn, the intricate plan had been meticulously set. Marco and Tony were tasked with orchestrating a grand diversion at Pier 47, a calculated ploy designed to convince Klov that we were finally yielding to his demands for the exchange. Simultaneously, Lorenzo's primary assault force would storm the processing plant, seizing the opportune moment of Klov's distraction to extract Clara swiftly and safely. And me? I inquired, though the answer already whispered a premonition in my mind. You stay here, Isabella. Safe. Protected. Lorenzo's hands framed my face, his thumbs tracing the line of my cheekbones with a tenderness that belied the grim circumstances. This is not negotiable. Like hell it isn't. I pulled back, my gaze locking with his, fueled by a stubborn, unyielding determination. Clara is in danger because of me. Because Claude wants to wound you by striking at me. I will not cower here in this luxurious penthouse while others put their lives on the line to clean up what I perceive as my mess. This isn't your mess, Lorenzo's voice resonated with absolute, non-negotiable finality. This is simply the price of being mine. And I refuse to risk losing you to settle old debts. We argued for another hour, a fruitless battle against Lorenzo's unyielding resolve. He was immovable on this point. I would remain confined to the penthouse, under heavy guard, while he systematically dismantled Claude's operation, piece by painstakingly violent piece. It was, I conceded, logical and tactically sound. Yet, it was utterly and completely unacceptable to every fiber of my rebellious being. Which is precisely why, a mere 3 hours later, I found myself crouched low behind a stack of weathered shipping containers at the very processing plant, my eyes fixed on Lorenzo's elite team as they expertly took their positions around the formidable building. I had slipped past his meticulously placed guards with an almost surgical stealth, utilizing the intimate knowledge gained during my years as a nurse. I exploited shift changes and security blind spots with the same calculated precision I once employed to navigate the chaotic labyrinth of busy hospital corridors. Vincent's voice crackled, sharp and urgent, through the stolen earpiece I daringly lifted from Lorenzo's desk. Teams in position. Boss, we're ready for your signal. Clara's location confirmed. Lorenzo's voice, when it came, was tight, a steel thread humming with controlled tension. Second floor office, northeast corner. 2 guards at the door. Unknown number inside. From my concealed vantage point, I could clearly discern Lorenzo, a stark, dark silhouette against the bleeding canvas of the pre-dawn sky. He moved with a predator's grace, poised to lead the assault on the very building where Clara was being held captive. Even from this distance, his every movement spoke volumes of coiled violence and absolute, unshakable determination. That's when, with a sickening lurch of fate, everything went catastrophically wrong. The explosion wasn't part of our plan. It erupted from the direction of Pier 47, a massive fireball blossoming against the darkness, momentarily illuminating the Boston Harbor skyline and sending palpable shock waves rippling ominously across the water. Lorenzo's diversion team, it became horrifyingly clear, had walked into something far more insidious, something far worse than a mere ambush. Marco's team is down. Vincent's voice, for the first time since I'd known him, was laced with raw, undisguised panic. Boss, it was a setup. Claude had explosives rigged throughout the entire pier structure. Lorenzo's immediate response was a guttural string of Italian profanity, its meaning needing no translation to convey sheer, incandescent rage. Claude had not merely outmaneuvered us, he had humiliated us, twisting our own tactical assumptions and expectations into a weapon against us, setting a meticulously crafted trap within a trap. New plan. Lorenzo's voice, a chilling blade of deadly calm, sliced through the rising chaos. We hit this building now. Hard and fast. Before Claude realizes his diversion has failed. Clara comes out alive. Whatever it takes. The assault began, a whirlwind of violence executed with surgical precision. Lorenzo's men moved like wraiths, like ghosts, through the labyrinthine processing plant, neutralizing guards with chilling efficiency, their silenced weapons spitting death in the pre-dawn gloom. From my hiding spot, I watched, mesmerized and terrified, as they systematically cleared each floor, a grim, methodical violence guiding their relentless advance toward Clara's confirmed location. Then I saw him. Claude. Himself. He emerged from a sleek, black sedan that had just glided silently to a halt at the plant's rear entrance. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, he moved with the chilling, almost arrogant confidence of a man who believed he meticulously controlled every single variable in this deadly equation. He wasn't alone. 6 heavily armed men, veritable shadows of death, flanked him as he disappeared into the building. And in that terrifying moment, a dawning, sickening horror washed over me. Claude hadn't been fooled by the diversion at all. Not even for a second. He had anticipated Lorenzo's rescue attempt and had positioned himself to personally oversee Clara's brutal execution the very moment it began. I keyed the stolen radio, my fingers trembling slightly. Lorenzo. Claude just arrived at the rear entrance. With reinforcements. He's heading for the 2nd floor. A chilling silence stretched, taut and agonizing, across the comm channel, before Lorenzo's voice finally cut through it. Deadly quiet. Isabella, what in God's name are you doing here? Being useful. Clara is in immediate, dire danger. Claude isn't here for a prisoner exchange, Lorenzo. He's here for a public execution. He wants you to watch her die. Another agonizing pause. Then Lorenzo's voice again, this time laced with a potent mix of resignation and raw fury. Vincent. Isabella's position, north side, behind the blue containers. Boss, she's got good cover, but she's completely exposed if this goes sideways. I could practically feel Lorenzo's teeth grinding, the sheer frustration radiating across the airwaves as he processed this new, volatile complication. Then, with the terrifying adaptability that had forged him into Boston's most feared and respected crime lord, he shifted tactics entirely, his mind racing. Isabella, can you see the 2nd floor windows from your position? Yes. Northeast corner. 2 guards visible. In approximately 3 minutes, those guards are going to be very distracted by explosions and gunfire. If Clara appears at that window, if she's in immediate danger, I need you to guide her to safety. My mouth went bone dry, a sudden, chilling dread seizing me. Guide her how? There's a fire escape on the building's north wall. If she can reach it, if she can climb down, Isabella, you'll be her only chance of getting out alive. Before I could even formulate a response, the war began in earnest. Lorenzo's team struck the processing plant like a precision hurricane, breaching multiple entry points simultaneously, unleashing a torrent of suppressing fire that shredded the pre-dawn quiet, transforming it into a deafening cacophony of raw, brutal violence. Muzzle flashes erupted, momentarily painting the building's windows like deadly, strobe light fireworks, as the relentless roar of automatic weapons echoed ominously across the harbor. I pressed myself deeper into my meager cover, feeling the searing kiss of stray bullets as they sparked off the metal containers surrounding me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror and adrenaline. This was nothing like the surgical, controlled precision of the warehouse rescue. This was urban warfare, chaotic, brutal, and utterly deadly, with Clara's precious life hanging precariously in the balance. A sudden movement at the 2nd floor window tore my attention away. Clara's face appeared briefly, fear-stricken and desperate, pressed against the glass, her mouth open in a soundless scream lost to the deafening gunfire. Behind her, for a horrifying instant, I caught a glimpse of Claude himself, his silver hair gleaming like a malevolent beacon as he cruelly grabbed her by the throat. Lorenzo! I keyed the radio, my voice thick with desperation. Claude has Clara at the window. He's going to. The window exploded outward in a violent shower of glass and splintered wood. For one horrible, heart-stopping moment, I thought Claude had thrown Clara to her death. Then, with a gasp of disbelief, I realized what I was truly witnessing. Clara Martinez, the 23-year-old archaeology student and gentle children's art teacher, had, in an astonishing act of defiance, grabbed a heavy desk lamp and used it to smash through the window herself. She now perched precariously on the narrow ledge, bleeding from multiple cuts, staring down at the dizzying 30-foot drop to the grimy alley below. Claude appeared directly behind her, gun clutched in his hand, his face a mask of contorted rage as the realization dawned on him. His prize hostage was daring to attempt an escape. That's when I made the decision, a singular, defiant choice that I knew, even then, would irrevocably define the rest of my life. I sprang up from behind the containers, deliberately making myself visible to both Clara and Claude, and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Clara! The fire escape! North side!" Claude's gun immediately swung towards me, its muzzle flash strobing blindingly in the pre-dawn darkness as bullets whizzed past, sparking off metal and concrete mere inches from my position. But Clara heard me. She saw me. She understood, with a flash of primal instinct, precisely what I was telling her. She didn't jump down to the alley. Instead, she launched herself sideways, a desperate leap towards the building's north wall where the fire escape ladder patiently waited. Her fingers, raw and bleeding, found purchase on the cold metal rungs, and she hung there, suspended for a terrifying, agonizing moment, before beginning her desperate descent. Claude's attention, momentarily diverted, now snapped back, his gun tracking inexorably toward Clara's vulnerable form on the fire escape. I could see him taking meticulous aim, preparing to end Lucas's girlfriend with chilling, cold precision. That's when Lorenzo appeared. Not just appeared, but materialized behind Claude like a vengeful specter, an avenging angel of death, moving through the shattered window with a lethal, silent grace. His custom-made knife found Claude's throat in one fluid, terrifying motion, before the Russian could even register the threat, opening his carotid artery in a horrifying spray of arterial blood that painted the window frame a grotesque crimson. Claude, the man who'd orchestrated Antonio Benedetti's death, the architect of decades of terror in Boston's underworld, died gurgling on his own blood, his eyes wide and vacant, fixed on the very woman who had defiantly escaped his meticulously planned, brutally anticipated revenge. Clara reached the ground, stumbling, just as Lorenzo's men finished methodically securing the building. I ran to her, my legs feeling like lead, catching her as she finally collapsed, instinctively checking her for any serious injuries while the distant wail of sirens began to cut through the receding echoes of battle. "Is it over?" Clara whispered, her voice raw and fragile, clinging to my hands with a desperate, white-knuckled strength. I looked up at the shattered second-floor window, where Lorenzo stood, a dark, formidable silhouette against the burgeoning light of the rising sun, Claude's blood still dripping, a grim testament, from the tip of his blade. Yes, I told her, and in that moment, I meant it with every fiber of my being. It's over. But as Lorenzo's piercing gaze finally found mine across the distance that still physically separated us, a profound, undeniable truth settled within me. Something fundamental had irrevocably shifted during the brutal violence and blinding chaos of the morning. I was no longer the same woman who had instinctively grabbed a stranger's hand in the rain merely a week ago. I was someone else entirely. Someone harder, forged in fire and fear, undeniably more dangerous, and utterly, completely committed to the man who had just killed to protect the people I now cared for so fiercely. Someone who, against all odds, truly belonged in Lorenzo Benedetti's world of shadows, secrets, and blood. 6 months later, the morning sun, now a symbol of peace, streamed generously through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our expansive private office on the 15th floor of Benedetti Construction's glittering headquarters. Its golden rays cast intricate patterns across the architectural plans and medical supply invoices meticulously spread across Lorenzo's polished mahogany desk. Outside, Boston stretched in every direction, no longer a foreign or menacing city, but a vibrant metropolis that now felt like something I had actively helped protect. I initialed the final purchase order for the new pediatric wing at St. Mary's, officially marking the completion of the single largest charitable donation in the hospital's storied history. The Isabella Benedetti Foundation had meticulously funded everything from cutting-edge surgical equipment to a state-of-the-art children's cancer research facility, all while maintaining complete, carefully guarded anonymity regarding its benefactor's true identity. "The board meeting went well?" Lorenzo asked, finally looking up from the sheaf of intricate construction contracts he was reviewing, as I neatly set aside the medical files. Dr. Martinez sends her regards and her immense gratitude. I moved around the expansive desk to where he sat, unconsciously, settling onto his lap in a gesture that had, over the past months, become utterly natural, utterly ours. The new wing will serve 3 times as many children as the old facility, I reported, a touch of pride in my voice. Lorenzo's strong arms effortlessly encircled my waist, pulling me closer, nestling me against the solid warmth of his chest. At 34, he still carried himself with that same compelling, controlled danger that had first irrevocably captured my attention. But now, I saw the profound gentleness that resided just beneath the surface of his carefully constructed mask. The way his touch always, instinctively, lingered on my wedding ring, the delicate platinum band he had slipped onto my finger in a private, intimate ceremony just 3 months ago. Any regrets? He asked the question, a ritualistic query, that he had posed countless times since I had made the definitive choice to leave my demanding nursing career and immerse myself completely in his world. About the hospital work? Sometimes. I traced the thin, almost imperceptible scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a permanent memento from the brutal night Claude died. But about you? Never. The Isabella Benedetti who had once instinctively grabbed a stranger's hand in the pouring rain would now barely recognize the formidable woman I had become. Gone were the crushing financial struggles, the sleepless nights spent in anxious worry over my mother's care, the constant, pervasive fear that had defined my precarious existence with Derek. In their place pulsed a different kind of tension, sharper, more potent, infinitely more purposeful. It was the electrifying knowledge that I now stood, unequivocally, at the very heart of an empire built on calculated violence and unwavering, absolute loyalty. Vincent's report came in this morning, Lorenzo murmured, his fingers idly combing through my hair with a practiced, tender affection. The Torino family has accepted our terms for the harbor contracts. I nodded, fully grasping the intricate implications. 6 months of painstaking, careful negotiation had finally secured Benedetti Construction's undeniable dominance over Boston's lucrative waterfront development, generating untold millions in legitimate revenue while simultaneously providing invaluable cover for less legal, but equally profitable, enterprises. It was precisely the kind of strategic victory that would have been utterly impossible without the sophisticated intelligence network we had painstakingly built together. And the other matter? I prompted, my voice soft. Lorenzo's expression darkened, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Commissioner Walsh confirmed it. Derek Morrison's death has been officially ruled a gang killing. Case closed. The investigation into Claude's organization died with him. A wave of profound relief flooded through me, though I maintained the perfectly composed exterior I had rigorously learned was absolutely essential in Lorenzo's world. Derek's death had been, in its own twisted way, necessary, perhaps even justified, but undeniably and completely illegal. Having it now disappear into bureaucratic limbo, officially labeled and filed away, finally removed the last lingering shadow that hung over our carefully constructed new life. My phone buzzed softly with a text from Clara, now Lucas's radiant fiancée and, surprisingly, my closest friend in this rarefied, often dangerous world of organized crime wives and girlfriends. The message displayed a photo from their engagement party planning, her radiant smile a stark, beautiful contrast to the terrified, blood-streaked woman I had helped rescue from that perilous fire escape just months ago. Clara wants to know if we're free for dinner Sunday, I told Lorenzo, a smile playing on my lips. Lucas is cooking. Lucas can barely make coffee without supervision, Lorenzo retorted, a hint of amusement in his voice. Clara's been teaching him, I explained. Apparently, he's developed a surprising passion for Italian cuisine. I laughed softly, easily imagining Lorenzo's younger brother, Lucas, hilariously struggling with complex pasta dishes and delicate sauces while his archaeology student girlfriend, Clara, provided patient, exasperated instruction. She says, it's adorable watching him try to impress her grandmother. Lorenzo's smile was genuine, utterly transforming his usually dangerous features into something devastatingly handsome, utterly disarming. "Tell them yes," he said. "It will be good for Lucas to show off his newfound domestic skills." The intercom on his desk buzzed softly, a subtle interruption. "Mr. Benedetti, your 2 o'clock appointment is here. Send them in." The imposing office door swung open, admitting Vincent and Marco. Both men nodded respectfully, their gazes acknowledging me, as they entered the meticulously appointed space. 6 months had utterly transformed my relationship with Lorenzo's inner circle, evolving from a wary, tentative acceptance into a bond of genuine trust and mutual respect, painstakingly built through shared danger and repeatedly demonstrated loyalty. "The Amalfi property is ready for your inspection," Vincent reported, placing a thick folder neatly on the desk. "Full security installation, private airstrip, complete communications array. Your honeymoon location, as specifically requested." I glanced at Lorenzo, genuine surprise widening my eyes. We had indeed discussed taking a delayed honeymoon once the complex territorial disputes were definitively settled, but he had been characteristically secretive, almost maddeningly so, about the finer details. "Italy?" I asked, a hopeful lilt to my voice. "The Amalfi Coast," Lorenzo confirmed, his voice imbued with a rare warmth. "My great-grandmother's village." His fingers gently intertwined with mine, and I caught the subtle gleam of his own wedding band, a heavy band of white gold that perfectly matched my own. "I thought it was time you met the rest of the family." The rest of the family. The phrase resonated, heavy and pregnant with unspoken meaning, in Lorenzo's world. Its implications stretched far beyond mere blood relatives. Meeting the Italian Benedettis meant formal recognition, unconditional acceptance into a powerful, ancient dynasty that stretched back for generations, rooted deeply in tradition and power. "How long?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. 2 weeks, maybe 3, Lorenzo replied, a glint in his eye, depending on how negotiations progress with the old families. His smile, then, turned subtly predatory. "It seems our rather undeniable success in Boston has attracted considerable attention from Palermo." Vincent cleared his throat, a diplomatic, almost apologetic sound. "There's also the matter of the Chicago representatives, boss. They've formally requested a meeting to discuss territorial boundaries in the Midwest." I listened intently as Lorenzo and his trusted men seamlessly transitioned into discussing expansion possibilities, complex territorial agreements, and meticulous revenue projections. They spoke with the same casual, almost detached precision I had once used to discuss patient care rotations and intricate medical procedures. The language was undeniably different, the stakes infinitely, terrifyingly higher, but the underlying structure of their world felt strangely familiar to me now. Problems to solve, people to protect, complex systems to optimize and maintain. "What about St. Mary's?" I asked, when their discussion finally wound down. "I have 3 foundation meetings scheduled next week. Sarah can handle the day-to-day operations," Lorenzo replied with quiet confidence. "She's proven herself remarkably capable at managing charitable distributions." Sarah Chen had, in fact, surprised everyone by actively requesting a permanent position with the foundation rather than returning to nursing after her harrowing rescue. The lingering trauma of her kidnapping had left her understandably unable to handle the unrelenting stress and demands of hospital work. Yet, in this new capacity, she had discovered an unexpected, profound talent for organizing relief efforts and meticulously coordinating medical supply donations. "And my mother?" I asked, a lingering concern in my voice. "The care facility in Amalfi has been thoroughly vetted, Isabella. Personally," Lorenzo assured me. "Your mother will receive the same exceptional level of care she currently gets here, with the added, invaluable benefits of the Mediterranean climate and specialized dementia treatment." He cupped my face gently, his eyes serious. "She'll be safe, Isabella. They all will be." After Vincent and Marco departed, their instructions clear and concise, I remained comfortably ensconced in Lorenzo's lap, processing the sheer magnitude of what he had planned. This wasn't merely a honeymoon, it was a complex, multi-layered diplomatic mission, designed not only to introduce me to the most powerful, tradition-bound crime families in Europe, but also to formally establish our formidable position within the international hierarchy of their world. "Are you nervous?" Lorenzo asked, his voice soft, reading my unspoken thoughts with an unsettling, almost uncanny accuracy. "Should I be?" His thumb traced a gentle path across my cheekbone. The old families can be intensely traditional in their expectations of women. But you've proven yourself in ways they will profoundly respect. You've shed blood to protect family. You've built legitimate enterprises that undeniably benefit the organization. Isabella, you've earned your place beside me through decisive action, not just through marriage. The profound weight of his words settled over me, not as a burden, but like a richly embroidered, powerful mantle. 6 months ago, I had been a pediatric nurse, barely struggling to pay bills and desperately trying to avoid an abusive ex-boyfriend. Now, I was the formidable wife of Boston's most powerful crime lord, the silent, strategic partner in a multi-million-dollar empire, a woman who had, without hesitation, killed to protect the people she loved. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked, my voice soft, almost hesitant. "The simplicity of your life before I grabbed your hand that night?" Lorenzo was quiet for a long, contemplative moment, his hand stroking gently through my hair as he meticulously considered the question. "I missed the illusion of simplicity," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "The belief that I could keep the violence compartmentalized, neatly separate from everything else. But you didn't complicate my life, Isabella. You completed it. Even though my world has made you vulnerable, given my enemies something they can use against you, you have, in turn, made me stronger." Lorenzo's voice carried absolute, unwavering conviction, a truth forged in fire. "A man with nothing to lose is dangerous, yes. But a man with everything to protect, that man is unstoppable." The late afternoon sun slanted obliquely through the windows, painting everything in the opulent office in rich, deep shades of gold and amber. Below us, the vast city hummed with its familiar, oblivious rhythm. Millions of people lived out their lives, completely unaware of the clandestine conversations and monumental decisions being made in the hushed, powerful towers like this one, far above their heads. I thought about the woman I had been just 6 months ago, terrified and utterly alone, convinced that her life was irrevocably spiraling beyond her control. That woman could never, not in her wildest nightmares or most vivid dreams, have imagined this very moment. This profound, visceral sense of belonging to something so much larger, so much more dangerous, and yet so utterly compelling than anything she had ever dreamed possible. "I love you," I said, the words still carrying the faint, sweet weight of surprise and awe, even after months of marriage. "And I love you." Lorenzo's response was immediate, certain, and absolute, a truth backed by a lifetime of actions, proven in blood and sacrifice, a love that superseded power, transcended the organization, and surpassed even life itself. He kissed me then, soft and deep, full of unspoken promises, tasting of dark, rich coffee and unyielding determination, imbued with the kind of dangerous, all-consuming devotion that built empires and toppled kingdoms. When we finally broke apart, both breathing harder, our pulses racing, Lorenzo rested his forehead gently against mine, in the gesture that had, over time, become our private, wordless language of intimacy. "Ready to meet the family?" he asked, his eyes serious, expectant. I thought about terrified nurses and brilliant archaeology students, about mothers suffering from dementia and loyal lieutenants who had, through fire and blood, become brothers. I thought about the vast, intricate network of people who now depended entirely on the choices Lorenzo and I made, together. "I'm ready," I said, and meant it with an absolute, unwavering certainty. Outside the windows, Boston glittered resplendently in the setting sun, a vast, sprawling city that, in its own way, belonged to us now. Held carefully in hands that had, through trial and tribulation, learned to balance mercy with necessary, brutal violence. The woman who had once run terrified through rain-soaked streets now stood, regal and unyielding, at the very center of an empire, protected and cherished, yes, but also absolutely lethal when threatened. Isabella Benedetti, Queen of Shadows, Architect of Charity, Keeper of a dangerous, all-consuming love. I had never, in my entire life, felt more completely myself. She stood, regal and unyielding, at the very heart of an empire. Though protected and deeply cherished, her nature was also absolutely lethal when threatened. This was Isabella Benedetti, at once the formidable Queen of Shadows and the compassionate Architect of Charity. She was also the steadfast keeper of a love both dangerous and all-consuming. I had never, throughout my entire life, experienced such profound completeness. I felt more truly myself than ever before.